Welcome, warriors, with skin as melanated as the day is long. You are now tuned in to the Crossroads, where sustainability meets social justice, knowledge is power, and we are breaking down stereotypes, one episode at a time. Welcome to the Crossroads.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Crossroads. This is the first solo episode of the year. Before that, I had the first the first Notes from the Field episode. And now here I am in the studio all by my little lonesome, but it's all good because I got a quick lesson to give, real quick, real dirty. So let's get into it. Before we get started with what we want to talk about today, we're going to give some flowers. And the first person that I am giving flowers to today is actually Nina Simone. So she is the person who helped to write or authored and sang the song Mississippi Goddamn. And that was her protest and response to the shooting death, the assassination, as far as I'm concerned, Medgar Evers, who was a civil rights leader and a war veteran and a father, and he was shot in the back in his driveway in front of his family. So we're actually going to give flowers to Nina Simone and Medgar Evers today. I wanted to have a decent talk about the wetlands. I don't know if you all are paying attention, and there's a lot to look at right now, but the wetlands are in jeopardy, and I want to talk about them, and specifically the Mississippi Delta. Come with me on this trip. Historically, the wetlands have always been viewed as a nuisance and an impediment to progress. There were 392 million acres of wetlands that constitute what we know today as the United States. What happened is people didn't like it. They wanted it gone. And as the amount of wetlands began to decline, folk started to notice that the migratory birds, who are the hunters, were not so thrilled about their hunting grounds being mowed down in the pursuit of progress. There were a couple of federal actions, of course, that came out, the Lacey Act of 1900 and Migratory Bird Act of 1918, but that did not really stop anything in terms of cutting the wetlands right on down. And if we fast forward to the 1950s, and between those years and the 1970s, 12 million acres of wetlands were lost due to agricultural practices. So what are the wetlands? What are they? Wetlands are a transitional area. And we can think about transition. When you transition your hair, right? When part of it's perm and part of it ain't. Transitional, all right, area between water bodies and drier uplands. Right? Some wetlands can be partially flooded during the year or fully flooded. And when I think about the wetlands, and this is an example of them, I usually think about swamps and marshes. Those are types of wetlands. And these are very sensitive ecosystems that a lot of different diverse wildlife depend on. Now, what is going on in Mississippi? Well, among other things, according to an article by Science Advances, the Mississippi Delta is in jeopardy. And specifically, they're saying that they've reached a tipping point. And you're probably like, well, what's that? If you like a weeble wobble or whatever. Okay, so a tipping point is the point after which, once reached or exceeded, can cause serious harmful effects on an ecosystem. And the reason that the Mississippi Delta is in such jeopardy is because of rising sea levels. Each year, due to climate change, the sea levels are continuing to rise. They are rising because of the melting that's going on in the ice caps. Places that are normally frozen are starting to melt. And this is one of the reasons that sea levels are rising. Primarily, the cause of this is human interference. So let's just get down to it. It's because the peoples are peopling. And marshes and other wetlands are the first line of defense against storms. And coastal wetlands, like the Mississippi Delta, are even more vulnerable. And what's going to end up happening is that areas like the Mississippi Delta are just going to be converted into open water. We're going to lose the wetlands, and these areas are just going to be open water, open space, right? And now we have come to the crossroads. Told you real quick. So why am I telling you this? What is so important about this, girl? Why should we care? Here's why you should care. Hurricane Ida came through Louisiana and caused massive destruction. And while some wanted to look on the bright side, like, oh, we've invested so much. And to be clear, what we've invested in New Orleans, we've spent $14 billion since Hurricane Katrina to reinforce the levee systems in New Orleans. We also know that there are other areas other than New Orleans that are impacted and have been impacted by Hurricane Ida. Look up a little town in Louisiana called Laplace. And going back to New Orleans very quickly, New Orleans is 4.94 to 9 feet below sea level, making it very prone to flooding, as we can see and as we know. And Hurricane Ida did not just stop in Louisiana. It went all the way up the East Coast and caused flooding and death in Maryland, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut. And hurricane season, as I've talked about on the show and will continue, they technically have it starting in June and ending in November. But we also know that last year we ran out of names for the storms because there were so many. And going back to the wetlands, if we want to preserve the wetlands, as I mentioned, some of them need to have periods of time where they are not flooded. And right now, that's not happening, especially in the Mississippi Delta. And let's talk about another example of a tipping point specific to this area. As a result of Hurricane Ida, there was an oil spill in the Gulf. Yeah. When this was first introduced onto the internets, it was very quiet. I didn't really see a lot of articles or traction about it. I don't know if there has since been more, but I'm here to help amplify the noise here. There was an oil spill as a result or as part of Hurricane Ida. This is also an example of a tipping point. This is a negative impact that is going to have irrevocable harm and damage and impact in the ecosystem in the Gulf, which has, as we know, historically, has already been hit pretty significantly with challenges. Now, what are we supposed to do about all this? I've come here, I've talked all this smack. What are we supposed to do? What can the average person right now who's listening to me talk, what are you supposed to do? Well, do not be dismayed. I've got some tips. Here are some things that you, a regular person who shops at the Gap, here's what you can do. First, stop shopping at the Gap. But anyway, okay. So first, stop using pesticides in your garden or your yard. If you are an agriculturalist, like a farmer, for example, try to use pesticides sparingly if you can. Pesticides destroy the fragile balance of an ecosystem with the chemicals that it is comprised of. Look at the Roundup lawsuit. Go look at that. Look that up. See what they're saying. Roundup actually does. Number 2, don't pollute your storm drains. Boom, done. If you live near the wetlands or sort of near them, and I'm going to say just frankly, if you live in Maryland, more than likely you are somewhere very close to some wetlands. Your runoff feeds into the wetlands. So don't dump your waste. Don't pour things down the drain. It only makes it more difficult to clean the water. And as we know from not just actually taking a dump or whatever, but we know from the use of plastics, right, that plastics do not degrade. They don't biodegrade. They just break down into smaller pieces that we know are microplastics, which means they don't go anywhere. They just get smaller and smaller, and they eventually accumulate in wildlife. They accumulate in us, etc. Okay. So don't pollute your storm drains. Number 3, try as best you can not to introduce non-native species of plants into your environment where you live. For example, using your yard, for example, if you can stick to using native species, that's for the best. Let's use an example. Think about bamboo. And bamboo is a very interesting subject. I may have to do something a little bit more in depth on it. But bamboo, for all intents and purposes, Bamboo is it's like the aliens out of Alien, just the face huggers. Bamboo is very evasive. So if you plant it in an area, it's going to take over. Think about non-native species in that exact same way. It is the same thing as spilling oil in the Gulf, taking a dump in the storm drain. Same thing. It's same thing. You're introducing things into an ecosystem that don't belong. So stop doing that too. And last but certainly not least, control your animals. Don't let your animals all up in the wetlands because they disrupt stuff too with their poop and other things, just eating things and doing what dogs and animals do. Keep your pets away from the wetlands as best you can. Also, a bonus, you can also reach into your purse and take some of your happy hour money and invest it in organizations who are working tirelessly to fight for the wetlands on your behalf. For example, in the great state of Maryland, there's the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Go see what they're talking about. Donate them a couple dollars. Let them know that you care, right? So these are the things that you can do. I hope all of this information has been helpful to you. The purpose of me bringing this up is not just to shake your chain and give you a hard time about taking a dump in the storm drain, spraying all the dandelions you see with Roundup. This is more about taking an issue, drilling it down so that you can see where you fit in and understand how your actions can have a greater impact on your environment and the environment that we're all trying to save from event level destruction. You can always follow me on all social media. I appreciate your time, and we will see you again at the crossroads.